Now, will you all help me welcome Staff Sergeant Gordon Schumacher, World War II, Europe. Gordon Schumacher was born in 1923 and grew up in the Emerald City of Seattle, Washington. After graduating from high school, Gordon went to work for Boeing. But just 9 months later, in 1943, he was drafted into the United States Army. Gordon soon found himself at Camp Roberts, California, for his 13 weeks of basic training in the sweltering summer heat. Gordon remembers that many of the men used to pass out in the heat, especially after receiving their medical shots. Eventually, Gordon found himself assigned to Camp Shelby in Mississippi, where he joined the 65th Infantry Division. Gordon excelled in his training with the 65th Infantry and in a matter of weeks found himself promoted to Private First Class, then to Corporal, and then to Staff Sergeant. He was then given the responsibility of training the raw, new draftee troops. As a drill sergeant, Gordon oversaw the training of 5 separate groups of newly drafted troops and got them ready for deployment overseas. Then, in December of 1944, as the land war in Europe was really starting to heat up, Gordon was deployed to Europe with General George S. Patton's army. Despite the fact that his current group of trainees had only 1 month of training, they were needed on the front lines and they were sent to be put to the ultimate test. Gordon and his men were among the first group of soldiers to be able to land directly in France, rather than having to go to England first. They spent a few bitter cold weeks at Camp Lucky Strike and then were loaded into railroad boxcars, 40 men stuffed into each car along with their field packs, and sent into the middle of the action as General Patton raced towards Germany. Gordon and his men would see combat for the first time in the early morning hours of March 17, 1945. Gordon and 45 other soldiers were ordered to attempt a sneak attack on the German forces camped on the other side of the river. At 4 a.m. in the morning, they quietly paddled across the river and made their attack. Unfortunately, the Germans responded quickly and pinned down Gordon's men and kept any reinforcements at bay with a withering artillery fire. They would be struck on the German side and stuck there all day long, dodging enemy rifle and artillery fire until at last, under the cover of darkness, they were able to make their way back to the American side. During the day-long fight, they would take numerous casualties, including Gordon's commanding lieutenant, who was badly wounded. Upon reaching the American side of the river, Gordon picked up and single-handedly carried his wounded friend and both of their field packs a full half a mile through the dark back to the nearest aid station. He did this so that his friend could receive the care that he urgently needed. To this day, Gordon isn't sure whether or where he got the strength to do such a physical feat. For his heroism, Gordon would receive the Bronze Star. That very night, the Germans would pull back from their position on the other side of the river, and Gordon and the men of the 65th Infantry would pursue them from town to town in brutal urban warfare. In addition to the constant threat from the dreaded German snipers, Gordon and his men had to endure seemingly continuous shelling from the German Screaming Mimi artillery rounds. The Screaming Mimi was a specially modified artillery round that made a horrible screaming noise as it shot through the air. The sound alone was enough to terrify, and Gordon confesses that it was pretty scary, especially for a 19-year-old kid. On one occasion, German artillery destroyed a house just 3 doors down from where he was spending the night. And on another occasion, shrapnel from an artillery round struck him and burned through 3 layers of his clothing and protective gear before he could get it off. The 65th Infantry Division would successfully help capture several key German towns and help to speed the disintegration of the remaining German resistance. As the fight moved further into the heart of Germany, Gordon and his men would spend 4 days traveling along the Autobahn. During this time, Gordon passed the Nazi concentration camp of Bergen-Belsen, and still he remembers the awful stench that surrounded that place. He'd also see the first jet engine airplanes that were developed by the Germans. Fortunately for the Allies, the planes had been developed too late to be put to effective use by the Nazis. Eventually, Gordon and the 65th Infantry would be stationed along the Enns River in Austria, the de facto dividing line between U.S. and Russian-controlled territory. It was here that 6 whole divisions of the German army would surrender to the Americans to avoid being captured by the ruthless Russian army. When the war officially ended, someone found out that Gordon had played the trumpet in high school, and he was immediately transferred into an Army dance band to stay behind and help entertain the troops who were helping to rebuild Europe. Gordon and his bandmates would play in USO and officers' clubs all over Europe. Gordon says that the highlight of his time came during a performance in a dance hall in Geneva, Switzerland. He and his band had played a special all-Glenn Miller swing dance party in a dance hall built for 1,000 people. The night of the performance, over 4,000 people packed inside to listen and to dance. By January of 1946, Gordon's time in the Army was up, and he boarded a transport for home. However, the adventure wasn't over yet, as a massive winter storm in the Atlantic threatened his transport ship with waves so massive the men had to be tied down into their bunks at night aboard ship. However, after 6 days and nights of battering, they at last came out of the storm and eventually made their way back to New York City. Gordon would go on to college and then to work in a grocery industry, and then back to work for Boeing, this time for 33 years. Gordon and his wife Janet recently celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. They are both active in their church and have sung in the choir for 40 years.
Gotta begin.
Gordon is a huge NASCAR fan and even got to attend the Daytona 500 race for his 75th birthday. Gordon has 4 children, 10 grandchildren, and 10 great-grandchildren. Ladies and gentlemen, please join with me in honoring Staff Sergeant Gordon Schumacher. And now, on a final note, we in North America live in the land of the free because of the brave. Thank you, gentlemen, for your service to your country.